Vic approaches revenge differently, shaped by a life of near misses and learning from mistakes. He doesn't wear his anger on his sleeve. Instead, it simmers quietly, building in layers that only he fully understands. Vic knows that reacting too soon can ruin everything, and in his mind, strategy always outweighs impulse. His revenge is methodical, like a chess game played several moves ahead. He studies his enemies, gauges loyalty, watches for weaknesses, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. To Vic, revenge is a puzzle, a careful orchestration of power, timing, and influence. Every step is meant to destabilize, to manipulate outcomes without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. While Jenard's approach is fire, Vic's is ice-cold, calculating, and slow, but just as lethal in its impact. What makes their dynamic fascinating is how these two very different approaches collide. Jenard's immediacy and Vic's patience create tension, but also a balance. Jenard pushes Vic to act boldly, to seize opportunities that Vic might have hesitated on. Vic keeps Jenard in check, preventing his raw anger from blowing up the plan prematurely. Together, they create a combination of force and strategy that is hard to anticipate. Each man amplifies the other's strengths while compensating for weaknesses, and in that balance lies the potential for devastating effectiveness. They are aware that their enemies are watching, trying to anticipate what either one might do. But the unpredictable mixture of Jenard's fire and Vic's calculation makes them nearly impossible to read. The psychology of revenge goes even deeper. Both men are driven by more than just loss or humiliation. They are trying to reclaim identity and respect. Jenard, once feared and respected, now carries the sting of doubt, and that drives him as much as hatred. Vic, who has always struggled to step out of the shadows of others, sees this as a chance to assert himself, not just as a survivor, but as a player who shapes the rules. Revenge becomes a mirror reflecting what they have lost, and in that reflection, they find the determination to strike back harder and smarter. Every move they make is about rewriting the narrative of their own lives, about ensuring that they are no longer victims but architects of chaos that their enemies cannot survive. Their enemies, however, are not blind. They will sense the tension, the calculated moves, and the hunger for retaliation. This awareness forces both Jenard and Vic to operate in layers, combining psychological manipulation with strategic strikes. Fear, uncertainty, and anticipation become weapons as much as guns, money, and influence. The revenge plan is not just about taking down targets, it's about controlling perception, shaping actions before anyone has a chance to react. In their minds, the perfect revenge is both a statement and a performance, a way to demonstrate that power is regained not through chaos alone, but through careful, deliberate orchestration. Even as they prepare, the mental toll is clear. They are both consumed, thinking constantly about what their enemies might do, how allies might betray them, and how their own pride could backfire. The psychology of revenge is a double-edged sword. Focus and drive are necessary, but obsession can lead to mistakes. Both men understand this danger, and that awareness forces them to respect each other's skills, even as they clash over decisions. In this tense mental battlefield, every thought, plan, and decision carries weight, and the emotional pressure becomes as critical a weapon as any other. Revenge, in their world, is as much about survival and identity as it is about punishment. The stakes are higher than ever, and the psychological complexity of their plan is what could make it unstoppable or destroy them both. Jenard and Vic knew that revenge wasn't just about striking back, it was about precision, timing, and making every move count. The chaos of their enemy's world was an opportunity, but it required more than anger to succeed. The blueprint they began to form was layered and meticulous, designed to destabilize everyone who had underestimated them. It started with information gathering, intelligence on allies, enemies, and anyone who could be leveraged. Contacts who were once loyal but fearful of exposure were quietly reminded that nothing in their world was guaranteed. Every conversation, every transaction, every alliance became a potential tool, and Jenard and Vic methodically mapped the networks around them. This phase of the plan was silent but deadly, creating a foundation of leverage that could explode. At the right moment, the next step focused on manipulation. Jenard and Vic understood that in the power universe, fear was just as effective as firepower. They began to plant seeds of doubt and paranoia among their enemies, subtle moves that would make rival factions question loyalty and decisions. Small acts of misdirected message, a timed betrayal, a staged confrontation were designed to make key players turn on each other. Every action was measured, crafted to provoke reaction without revealing their hand too soon. This psychological warfare was as critical as any physical confrontation, and both men knew that once their enemies were destabilized internally, the larger plan would have a far greater effect with less risk. The blueprint relied heavily on patience, waiting for the right moment when miscalculations and insecurities would leave their targets vulnerable. Money, influence, and leverage became the next layer of their strategy. Jenard brought street power and the ability to intimidate people into compliance, while Vic controlled access to resources, financial channels, and contacts that could manipulate outcomes behind the scenes. Together, they created a network of pressure points, people who owed them favors, weaknesses in their enemies' operations, and secrets that could be exposed to maximum effect. Every financial move, every strategic placement, and every subtle threat was intended to tighten the noose without revealing their full intentions. The brilliance of the blueprint was in its duality. Outwardly, they could appear as if nothing was happening, while behind the scenes, systems were being destabilized, alliances undermined, and power quietly transferred into their hands. The final layer of the revenge plan involved timing the ultimate strike. Jenard and Vic were careful not to act too early. They wanted maximum impact, the kind of strike that would leave enemies reeling and allies reconsidering loyalty. The plan accounted for contingencies, double crosses, and the unpredictability of a world where betrayal was a constant threat. Even the smallest misstep could compromise everything, so every move was mapped, rehearsed, and calculated. The endgame was clear. They wouldn't just reclaim what they lost, they would reshape the hierarchy, demonstrating that no one, not even the most confident enemy, could challenge them without facing consequences. The blueprint of the plan wasn't just tactical, it was a statement. It said that power, respect, and fear were not granted, they were taken meticulously by those willing to do whatever it took. Every element of this plan relied on trust, timing, and adaptability. Both men were aware that despite their planning, unpredictability was inevitable. The city's underworld was alive, volatile, and always ready to fight back. But the strength of the blueprint was that it turned unpredictability into an advantage. Each unexpected twist could be exploited, each betrayal anticipated, and each challenge absorbed as part of the larger strategy. Jenard and Vic weren't just planning revenge, they were designing a system of influence and control that would survive beyond the immediate retaliation. In their minds, the ultimate success of the plan wasn't measured in individual victories, but in the long-term collapse of those who had underestimated them. The streets, the power networks, and even the law itself would feel the impact. And the message would be clear. This was not mere revenge. This was a return, calculated, unstoppable, and unforgettable. Even the most carefully crafted alliance has its weaknesses, and Jenard and Vic's partnership was no exception. On paper, their combination of fire and calculation seemed unstoppable, but the reality was far more fragile. Both men were driven by pride, ambition, and a deep-seated desire to prove themselves. And those same traits that made them dangerous could just as easily destroy their alliance. Jenard's impulsive nature often clashed with Vic's meticulous planning. What Jenard saw as a bold move, Vic saw as reckless, and this difference in approach created tension at every turn. Arguments flared behind closed doors, unspoken resentments built, and every decision required negotiation. Even when they agreed on a plan, each step carried the risk of miscommunication or misunderstanding, and in their world, one misstep could be fatal. The alliance, while powerful, was constantly on the edge of collapse. Trust was the biggest vulnerability. Neither man could fully let down his guard. Jenard knew Vic was clever enough to exploit any weakness if given the chance, and Vic understood that Jenard's emotions could override logic at the worst possible moment. Every action, every move, was both a test of loyalty and a potential trap. Their enemies might sense the cracks, looking for the slightest hesitation or disagreement to exploit. They had to constantly monitor not just the outside threats, but each other. The tension between them was a dangerous tightrope walk where success depended as much on mutual restraint as on the effectiveness of the plan itself. It was a high-stakes dance where one misstep could unravel everything they had built. Beyond trust, ambition created its own set of risks. Both Jenard and Vic wanted more than revenge. They wanted power, recognition, and control. Everything they built is gone, trust shattered, power slipping through their fingers, and enemies closing in from every angle. Jenard and Vic thought they could play the game. But the game played them. Now both are left with nothing but anger. And a single goal, revenge. But when two men with broken pride join forces, the consequences are bigger than anyone could imagine. Jenard had always believed he was untouchable. Every move he made in the streets and in the world of power legacy was calculated, precise, and confident. But the last few months had shattered that illusion. Deals that were supposed to secure his control over territory fell apart. Trusted allies turned their backs when the heat got too high. Every whisper on the street reminded him that the network he once ruled now had cracks, and enemies were circling like sharks smelling blood. The betrayal cut deeper than money lost or territory surrendered. It was a hit to his ego, his reputation, and his sense of control. For a man who prided himself on dominance, this felt like a personal death. He had to regroup, and the only way to do that was to plan a comeback so sharp it would remind everyone why Jenard's name mattered. Vic's situation wasn't much better, though it looked different on the surface. Vic had grown up in the shadow of a legacy he was never fully prepared for. Season after season, he had watched others take the spotlight while he struggled to find his place. The last events left him exposed, not just financially but emotionally. Friends he thought he could trust vanished when danger approached, and family ties had proven to be fragile. He knew that every step he took now mattered more than ever. One wrong move and he could be erased, a ghost in the city that once promised him power. Vic wasn't just angry, he was desperate. And desperation could be as dangerous as a bullet in the right hands. What makes this fallout more intense is how the world shifted under both their feet almost overnight. Allies became enemies. Minor rivals gained boldness, and the streets seemed to hum with a new kind of tension. Both Jenard and Vic realized that surviving the aftermath of their losses wasn't enough. The people who had betrayed them, mocked them, or underestimated them needed to feel the weight of their return. The city, which once whispered their names in respect, now whispered in doubt. This doubt was a challenge they couldn't ignore. It became clear that the only way to restore their names and their power was through a plan that would shock everyone. But first, they needed each other. The emotional toll was heavy for Jenard. Anger and humiliation fueled every thought. He replayed every mistake, every betrayal, and every slight. And the fire to reclaim what was his grew hotter with each memory. He didn't just want revenge, he wanted validation. Proof that despite being knocked down, he was still the man no one could control. Vic, on the other hand, carried a different kind of weight. His pride had been wounded, but it was paired with a careful calculation. Unlike Jenard, Vic had learned that reckless aggression could be fatal. He had to move smart, use the chaos to his advantage, and strike at the heart of those who thought he was weak. The combination of Jenard's raw fire and Vic's sharp mind created a dangerous mix. Both men were broken, but their brokenness became the foundation for a plan that could shake the city to its core. Even the smallest details mattered now. Every conversation overheard, every gesture, every shift in alliances could tip the scales. The streets had changed, and so had the rules. Power no longer came from sheer force. It came from understanding weaknesses, predicting moves, and striking at the right time. Both Jenard and Vic knew that rushing in without a plan would only end in disaster. They were aware that their enemies were waiting, watching, and hoping for another mistake. That awareness forced them to think deeper, act smarter, and let the fury of their losses transform into strategy. The fallout wasn't just about what they had lost, it was the trigger that would ignite one of the most dangerous alliances the city had ever seen. At this point, it was no longer about survival. Survival was assumed. The streets had already decided their fate unless they fought back, and fight back they would. Jenard and Vic were preparing not just to reclaim what they lost, but to send a clear message to anyone who had doubted them. Underestimating them again would be the gravest mistake of their lives. Every setback, every betrayal, every lost opportunity had been absorbed and transformed into fuel. The city that had once celebrated their rise would now tremble at their return. This was the moment when broken pride and calculated fury collided, setting the stage for a revenge that would be remembered long after the dust settled. Jenard had always been a lone wolf, someone who trusted no one completely and relied only on his own instincts. But after the recent chaos, it became painfully clear that he couldn't take on every enemy by himself. His territory was vulnerable, his resources stretched thin, and the people he thought were loyal were either gone or ready to betray him. At the first sign of weakness, he realized that brute force alone wouldn't rebuild his empire. He needed strategy, intelligence, and someone who could move in ways he couldn't. That someone, reluctantly, was Vic. At first glance, Vic seemed an unlikely partner. He was younger, less experienced in the streets, and carried the shadow of a family legacy that made him both privileged and vulnerable. But that very combination of traits made Vic useful. He had connections that Jenard didn't, knowledge of legal and financial loopholes, and an ability to read situations differently. Jenard's fire and Vic's calculation could create a partnership more dangerous than either could be alone. Vic, for his part, was just as wary. He hadn't forgotten the ways Jenard could be reckless, impulsive, and driven by pride above all else. Trust didn't come easy to him, especially not with someone who had burned him in the past or undercut allies for personal gain. But Vic understood one thing clearly: enemies were everywhere. And alone he was at a disadvantage. The recent betrayals, near misses, and losses had taught him that survival required alliances, even uneasy ones. And in the world of power legacy, survival was everything. Vic also recognized that Jenard, despite his flaws, brought something to the table that Vic didn't have: influence. People feared Jenard in ways that Vic couldn't command yet. That fear could be used strategically, and if combined with Vic's calculated moves, it could tip the balance in ways that no single person could achieve alone. Their alliance wasn't born from friendship or respect, it was born from necessity. Each had skills, knowledge, and resources the other lacked. Jenard knew how to intimidate, manipulate, and control people on the streets. Vic had the ability to plan, anticipate consequences, and exploit systems that others couldn't see. Put together, they could cover each other's weaknesses and amplify their strengths. The stakes were high, and both understood that a misstep could be fatal, but the potential payoff made the risk unavoidable. The city had shifted in ways neither of them could ignore, and the only way to regain what they had lost or even surpass it was by working together. At least for now. What made this partnership even more intriguing was the tension between their personalities. Jenard's intensity and raw energy clashed with Vic's methodical, calculating approach. Arguments were inevitable, clashes would happen, and tempers would flare. But beneath that tension was a silent acknowledgement neither could achieve their goals alone. Every enemy watching the streets knew they were vulnerable, but combining forces created a threat so unpredictable that even the most seasoned players couldn't anticipate the next move. Their enemies assumed that two wounded men would fail, but that assumption was exactly what made their potential strategy dangerous. Necessity forced trust, and trust, even if temporary and fragile, created opportunity beyond the practical reasons. There was also a psychological edge to their alliance. Jenard needed Vic to prove he could still command influence in a world that had started to doubt him. Vic needed Jenard to reclaim a sense of power he had nearly lost. A reminder that he could fight back against a system that had underestimated him. Together, they fed off each other's urgency, their combined anger sharpening their focus. Each move they planned carried double weight because it wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival, reputation, and identity. In a world where loyalty was fleeting, their temporary partnership became a weapon as potent as any firearm, bribe, or scheme, even as they moved forward. Both men knew the risk of this alliance breaking apart was high. Pride, ambition, and old grudges were dangerous forces that could explode at any moment, but the stakes were too high to worry about personal differences. Their enemies were stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than ever, and neither could afford to be isolated. The city had changed, the game had changed, and only a calculated, united front could navigate the chaos. The necessity of working together, despite their distrust, created a tension-filled synergy, one that could either lead to ultimate triumph or mutual destruction. Every step they took in this alliance would define not only the immediate revenge plan, but also the future of their personal legacies in ways neither could ignore. Revenge is rarely simple. And for Jenard and Vic, it's not just about hitting back, it's about proving something to themselves. Jenard's anger is sharp and immediate, like a live wire he can't control. Every insult, every betrayal, every loss he's suffered burns under his skin.